Good morning, everybody, and welcome again to our Garden Shop Garden Guru workshop for today. I see we've got very few people today. It looks like we only 8 here today. So I'm going to do what I've never done before is at the end of the workshop, I'm actually going to unmute everybody, and then you can ask me questions if there's any questions that you've got. All the names here on my screen, they all look familiar to me, so welcome, and thank you again for joining us. I think the mailer this week went out quite late, and a lot of people actually didn't get our link for the workshop. Remember, if you don't have the link, you can always go to our website, gardenshop.co.za, and if you go to the events tab, you will find all the workshops listed there with the login details if you go into the separate ones there. So if you do miss any links, you can always get it there, or you can email me and I'll gladly send it to you as well. So yes, thank you very much for joining us. And today we're talking about sweet and sour soil and everything you need to know about acid-loving plants. And as most of you know, Kay has pursued other career opportunities, and she's not with us anymore. So I did the visual presentation for our slideshow today as well. So I hope it's up to standard. I don't think it's as good as Kay's ones, but I'm going to share it with you regardless. So here goes. And there we go. I just want to go to the slideshow here and admit this person over here. Right, so that is our slideshow for today, and let me just go to the slideshow. And I'm sorry about this, please move this window away from the application. It looks like that's got something to do with the internet connection, and there is absolutely no way in which I can actually sort of get that little window away. It seems it sort of comes and goes as the internet connection gets better and worse. So as I say, today we're talking about sweet and sour soil and acid-loving plants. And as you well know, my name is Sue, and I'm your garden guru from Garden Shop. Now, acid-loving plants prefer a soil pH of about 5.5 or less. So anything between 0 and 5.5. Most plants don't actually grow very well in a very acidic pH, something like 1 or 2. So usually it's about between 3 and 5.5 that you're looking at for your acid-loving plants. Now, this lower pH enables these specific plants to absorb the nutrients they need in order to flourish and to grow and to have good flowers. And a lot of our acid-loving plants, we actually do plant them especially for their flowers. So it's really important that we actually then look after these plants in order to sort of get the most out of them. And the list of plants that grow in acidic soil is quite extensive. But I'm going to focus just on a few of the most common ones, mostly plants that would naturally grow in forest floors, anything from ferns, etc., etc. Those are usually more acid-loving plants because usually your soil in forests are quite a bit more acidic than, say, for instance, on a grassland, which tends to be a bit more alkaline. So simply put, pH is the measure of how acid or how alkaline your soil is. Now, soil pH is measured on a simple scale, and as we've said, it ranges from 0 to 14, the midpoint being 7, which is basically a neutral soil pH, so it's neither acid or alkaline. Now, anything below 7 is acidic, and the lower the pH number, the more acidic the soil is. Alkaline soils are those with a pH above 7, and similarly, the higher the pH number, say for instance 10, the more alkaline the soil is. Now, most plants actually flourish in quite a neutral pH. So how can you test how your pH is? Usually that is not really necessary. Our soil mostly on the Highveld are slightly alkaline, usually with a pH between 7.5, 8, and so that's pretty neutral. But if you want to measure the pH of your soil, you can either get a soil testing kit or you get some soil testing meters, and you can test the pH of your soil. But I wouldn't say that that's really necessary, because as I say, we know for a fact that our Highveld pH is anything, say, between 7.5, 8, 8.5. You can also think about the Highveld traditionally, sort of in old times before we started gardening here. It was basically grassland, and that is the pH that grassland plants would then prefer. Now, ericaceous plants or calciferous plants, they are adapted to grow in acidic soils. Now, in acidic soils, it's a bit more difficult to take up some sorts of nutrients, and these plants have adapted through the ages to actually be able to grow in these very acidic soils. Now, as I said, most plants actually prefer a neutral pH between 6.2 and 7, and then they will also grow in a slightly acidic sort of climate, and then you get your plants that needs quite a very acidic soil to grow in. And then on the other hand, in terms of alkaline, the plants that grow in very alkaline, highly alkaline soils are very few, and they again are adapted to actually sort of grow in those conditions. You would think, for instance, a salt pan, which is very alkaline, you would hardly find any plants growing there, and those type of plants that you get there are sort of strange and wonderful plants, and they would probably not grow in very many other places other than that salt pan. Now, how do we know if plants require a more acidic pH? The signs that a plant is not suited for the pH of the soil can manifest in several ways. You can get chlorosis, that's the yellowing of the leaves, and you'll see usually, because yellowing of leaves can be either one or two things. It can be a nitrogen shortage or an iron shortage. The iron basically binds nitrogen, so if you don't have enough iron, then you can't bind the nitrogen that actually makes the plant green. Iron is a very it's a micro element, so plants don't actually need that much iron, but if you don't have the iron, then the plant can't actually fix the nitrogen to actually take it up and use it for photosynthesis. Now, you can also get stunted growth, so plants that doesn't seem to want to grow at all. That's usually because of a pH difficulty, and then the curling of leaves as well is also an indication. And that is because the availability of nutrients varies in soils according to the pH. For example, in acidic soils, you get quite a high level of iron because your nitrogen is less, so those plants actually use more iron to actually bind the little nitrogen that is in the soil in order to make the plant healthy. So I'm going to go through just a few of the most common acidic loving plants. And funnily enough, a lot of these plants are actually shade loving. As I said, traditionally acid soils will be found sort of in more forested areas, and these plants then would grow in more shady conditions. So thus, a lot of the acid loving plants are actually shade loving plants as well. Now, usually in our shady areas, uh, there hasn't been a forest for ages and ages and ages. So again, our soil is probably not acidic, and we would have to do an acid supplement in order to get these plants to grow well. Now, the first one on my list, and it's really one of my favorites, is azaleas and rhododendrons. Now, very, very many varieties available, from your singular varieties like the one on the picture, to very double and dwarf varieties, the ones that you buy as, say, indoor plants, but they grow equally well outdoors. Azaleas are truly beautiful, and if they're treated well, you can actually get a huge flower spurge in spring, and then sometimes if you treat the plants well, you might later in the season get a few flowers as well. As I say, double varieties are available, single varieties. And the amazing thing about these plants is that they're actually very drought resistant. They do not like wet feet. They would get a cold if they've got wet feet. So don't overwater them. Make sure that your soil is well drained. And then also, they are highly adapted to deal with very cold climates. So they really, really do well if we give them enough TLC in our areas. They also make fantastic container plants. And remember, in a container, you can regulate the pH of your soil much easier than, say, for instance, in the open ground. Now, the next one on my list is camellias. Again, one of my favorite plants. The two species that we actually get in South Africa for garden purposes is your Camellia japonicus. Those would usually be your more doubly camellias, and you'll see the leaf is a bit bigger, the actual green leaf, and the margin of the leaf is not as much serrated. And camellias mostly just grow in the shade, but there is a variety called Camellia sasanqua, which we also get in South Africa, and they grow both in sun and shade. The flowers of the sasanqua is not as double. I always think of them as like huge apple blossom flowers. They do come in very many different colors. They do sometimes come as a semi-double flower, but not as fully double as your Camellia japonicus. And as I say, your sasanquas, they would grow both in the shade and the sun quite easily if they do have acid soil around them. The sasanquas, you'll see the leaf is slightly smaller, and it's also more serrated than the japonica. Now, interesting enough, and I think I've mentioned this before, and some of you might even know this, tea that we drink, normal black tea, Joko tea, Ceylon tea, whatever you want to call it, also comes from camellia, and it comes from a camellia plant called Camellia sinensis, and that is actually what they use for making tea. And for our normal black tea like Joko, etc., those tips of the green leaves are picked, they fermented or rotted or composted and then dried. Whereas with green tea, It's the same leaf tips that's used, but those leaves are just dried without the fermentation process. So that's just something interesting about camellias. The next thing on my list is gardenias, and again, very, very many varieties of gardenias available. What makes it so magnificent is the absolute beautiful scent of the flower, and also the longevity of the flower. The flower, even if you pick it off from the bush itself, would last for like at least 2-3 days before it starts turning a yellowish brown, which also brings me to the point that you actually do get some camellias that's got sort of a creamy color, more a yellowish tone in them. As I say, very many different varieties of them available. Some grow in bushes. You also get ground cover types of gardenia. You also get an indigenous type of gardenia, which grows very well in South Africa, but for the most part, gardenias grow very well all over South Africa if you do give them some acid food. They will even tolerate quite a bit of sunshine if you do give them a chance to adapt to the sunshine, but otherwise they grow equally well in the shade where they actually would grow traditionally. So gardenias, another one of those acid-loving plants. The next one on my list is today, yesterday, and tomorrow, or Brunsfelsia. Also, I'm sure quite a familiar face to all of you. They usually also bloom early in spring, but they will have sporadic flowers throughout the summer season. And the reason for the name of the plant today, yesterday, and tomorrow is because of the flower color that comes out as purple as a new flower, then changes to sort of a pinky mauvey color, and then eventually turns white. Now that doesn't really happen in a day's time, but usually these plants are like covered with flowers in spring, and the scent from the flowers is also quite distinct and a lovely scent when you're wandering through your garden, your spring garden, in the late afternoon on a spring evening. Now, another one that I think is you're all familiar with, is hydrangeas, or Christmas roses, as we also call them, because they tend to flower over December, January. Lovely, big blooms. I know my husband doesn't like them at all. He thinks it makes him think of those funeral like bouquets that they did in the old days, those plastic ones, and they put them on the tombstone. But for me, I've got lovely memories as a child from hydrangeas. Now, the interesting thing about hydrangeas is that they can actually change color, and they can actually indicate to you what the pH of your soil is. Now, when your soil is quite acidic, the hydrangeas would be purple, blue, whereas if it's more alkaline, it would be more pinkish. And the in-between color would be white. So usually what you find here on the Highveld is that people buy blue hydrangeas, and then over a period of time, and that's usually not just in 1 year, it's like a few years, the flower would change to white, and eventually they would turn out to be pink. Now, if you drive down the coastal areas, Knysna, George, those areas where we've got acidic soil naturally, you'll see in December when the hydrangeas are flowering, they're mostly purple. So that's an indication that the soil is more alkaline. Now, on the Highveld, as I say, unless you're planting your hydrangeas in pots where you can really sort of maintain your acidity, these flowers usually tend to turn pinkish over time, unless you really put some effort into it to keep the soil acidic. Now, you get two types of hydrangea food. You get hydrangea food for pink flowers and hydrangea food for purple flowers, but in our area I actually just use the one for purple flowers, because if you buy it as a pink flower, then your chances of it turning purple, of that acid food making your flower purple, would be very, very slim. So I just feed all my hydrangeas with the purple hydrangea food. Yeah, so that's just a few of your acid-loving plants. Things that also fall into that category is, for instance, blueberries. Blueberries also like acidic soil, and then all your fynbos species also love acidic soil. The only problem is that when you plant any fynbos, proteus, etc., you really don't want to add any nutrients to the soil. The moment you add nutrients to the soil, you are actually going to deter the growth on those plants, and they might even die. So unfortunately, with proteas, etc., we can't really add any acidity to the soil, apart from mainly putting a little bit of pine needles over the soil. So how do you plant an acid-loving plant in our area? If you want to, you're basically going to need acid compost, and then you're going to need some 315 fertilizer. Now, with acid-loving plants, I prefer to use organic fertilizer, because that stimulates the microbes in the soil, which will then help to maintain that acidity in the soil. So the first step, and I'm sure we've gone through this several times over, but just to recap, you dig a hole about double the size of the container of the plant. Then you mix your soil that you've removed from the hole with 50% acid compost, not normal compost, acid compost. And you put a handful of some Vita 315 in that. You mix that all together outside the hole, and then you're going to fill your hole halfway or to the depth of your plant with the new mixture that you've prepared. And you're going to remove your plant from the container very carefully. Most acid-loving plants don't like to have their roots to be disturbed too much, so don't dig around them too much or anything like that. And then you just place your plant in the prepared hole at the same height as the original container. You fill the hole with the remainder of the prepared soil, and you make sure that the plant is secured nicely, pressing down the soil. And then lastly, you're going to water your newly planted plant well. And remember, for most of those acid-loving plants, once the plant is established, they are actually not going to need that much water, mostly A, because they grow in the shade, and B, that they actually get rot or color rot if they have too much water. So make sure that if you're planting them in containers, that your containers are draining very, very well. And then lastly, you can just cover your around the plant with some acid compost as a mulch, and you can use some pine needles. If you can get some pine needles, hold of some pine needles anywhere, you can cover that as a mulch layer as well. Remember never to work undecomposed material like pine needles into your soil, because that will take the nitrogen out of the soil instead of putting it into the soil as a result of the decomposition process. So we've quickly made you a little video on how to plant your acid-loving plants, and I'm going to share that with you now. Hi, I'm Sue, garden guru from Garden Shop, and this is my team, Bethel and Alton. And today we are going to show you how to plant an acid-loving plant. Now our specimen that we brought today is an azalea, and she's a very nice little pink one. I can show you. And we are going to show you how to plant this plant so that it will grow the best it possibly can. Now first of all, what we need is we've got some acid compost here, and then we have some organic fertilizer for planting with, Vita 315, and we also have some pine needles that we're going to be using for mulching the plant afterwards. Right, let's start at the beginning. Alton is going to dig a hole there for us. Now what size must your hole be? Your hole must be double the size of the actual size of the plant container. So Alton is digging a hole there for us, and he's taking the soil out, putting it here on the side, with the tuck down there, make a nice hole, the deeper as you can, Alton. Get those free roots up. There will always be free roots when you're going to plant azaleas because they love growing in the shade. Like most acid-loving plants, in fact, they love growing in the shade because their natural environment would be your forest floors, and forest floors have natural acidic soil. Right, Bethel is putting some acid compost on here for us. Just put some more in. You need about 50% acid compost and 50% soil, and then a little bit, a small handful of fertilizer, just a little bit. Okay, that's enough. Okay, and we're going to mix this in together. Will you do that quite well? Well, I take the plant out of the container here. There you go. Try to disturb the roots as little as possible. Unless the roots are sort of root bound, then you would loosen a bit at the bottom. Okay, that's our whole dug. Now, we're going to take some of this pre-mixed acid compost soil fertilizer mixture, and then we're going to pull the hole up with it, up to the point when we get to this height, we put the plant in the hole. Okay, I think that's about it, Alton. Give us a bit more acid compost there. The more acid compost, the better. You can't go wrong with acid compost. So that will just help to maintain it later on. Right. So now we're going to take some of this mixed soil, and we're going to put it into the hole here. A little bit more. Right here. And we've got our plant. And you can see the level of the plant is the same level as the soil. And now we're just going to fill up our hole here with some of our soil mixture. We're going to tighten it nicely. Right. And we're going to give this baby a little bit of water. Alton, hand me that hose pipe there, please. Thank you so much. Be careful, I'm going to rain now. We're going to give it a nice little bit of water here. Make sure that it drains through to the bottom of the hole. You want to keep the plant nice and moist. There we go. And just to make it better for the plant, we're going to take some more acid compost, and we're going to mulch it over this plant here. That will help to maintain the acidity. There we go. And then Alton and Bethel have also been collecting some pine needles for me. Now pine needles also helps to keep the soil acidic, so we're going to mulch nicely around here with some pine needles. Don't dig the pine needles into the soil. We're just putting it loosely on, and take out the green ones. Making a nice little nest for it, and that will also help it to retain water. There we go. I'm just going to give it a last bit of water. everything can settle down. And that's our little azalea planted. Thank you very much for watching this video with us today. It's Alton and Bethel that's been helping me planting here, and I'm Sue, your garden guru from Garden Shop, and you can find all my details on our webpage, www.gardenshop.co.za. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little instructional video, and thank you to Alton and Bethel for helping me there. So how do you care for your acid-loving plants after you've planted them? Now, in order to keep the acid-loving plants healthy, we need to maintain that acidity of the soil, because over time, the soil will again become alkaline because of osmosis. And I'm sure you all know what osmosis is. It's a neutralizing effect where if you've got too much of something, it would sort of spread to neutralize all over the liquid. I think you all remember that little experiment that you used to do at school, putting a spoon of salt in a cup of water, then over a week, the salt would actually sort of dissolve throughout the water. So it's basically the same effect. So you need to maintain that acidity in the soil, because as I say, our soil is not acidic. Now, the easiest thing to do is to use an acid supplement like Wonder Shake and Grow, which is really easy to use. You just sprinkle it around the roots of the plants, and you would do that once a month. As I said, over here, you do get a Shake and Grow a pink hydrangea food, but I just use the blue one, and the blue one you would use for all your other acid-loving plants like your gardenias, camellias, azaleas, etc. as well. So once a month, sprinkle that around the roots and water it in order to maintain that acidity. If the leaves of the plants are starting to get a bit yellowish, give it a spoon of iron chelate mixed with water. This will not make the soil acidic, but it will supply the plant with the needed iron that it's abundant in acid soil. So, and that way the plant can then bind with the nitrogen in order to photosynthesize. And then the last thing is to mulch your plants in autumn and spring with a good layer of acid compost. As I said, don't dig it into the soil when you've got existing plants. Most acid-loving plants actually don't have very big root systems, A, and B, they actually don't like their roots to be disturbed too much. And then if you can get hold of some pine needles, it's always a good idea to mulch with pine needles. Again, the pine needles won't make the soil acidic, but it will help to maintain the acidity in the soil. So the joys of acid-loving plants are that they can be a really, really great focal point, especially because they grow in shady areas mostly. And they usually grow very well in containers as well. Now, that's something that you really should maybe consider if you are planting acid-loving plants, is to actually use containers because they usually don't have very big root systems, having to grow in foresty areas most of the time. And they also have very low water requirements once they are established. So they really are quite hardy, and most of these plants are actually quite cold tolerant as well. Now, if you want to make it easier to maintain the acidity in your soil when you're planting these plants in your garden, you could actually sink plastic containers into the soil, into those areas, and plant the plants then in an acid compost mixture where it won't be affected by the surrounding soil as well. Otherwise, you can use decorative containers where you can place them in a focal position where they can really, really look great. So that is it from me on acid loving plants, and I hope you found this interesting. Just our upcoming courses and workshops and everything is sort of in the scales at the moment. Our rose pruning and rose care workshop, which is tomorrow, and it was going to be at our Bryanston branch, but we have migrated it to an online workshop that will be at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. And if you are interested in attending this workshop, it will be from 10 to 12. We will take a little bit of a break in between so that you can go and make a cup of coffee or something like that. And the cost for this workshop is 200 Rand. And so you can just let me know, and I can send you the payment details, the links, and the PDF document for the workshop as well. That's tomorrow at 10 o'clock. And then the fruit tree pruning, sorry, I'm getting a bit muddled up here, and care workshop is supposed to be at our Bryanston branch on the 24th of July. Again, we will have to wait to hear what the president has to say, and this might be migrated to an online workshop as well. So I'll keep you posted on that. And then our gardeners course at our Parktown branch, that will start on the 24th of August. And the gardeners course at our Bryanston branch will start on the 25th of August. But hopefully by that time, we will be able to conduct these workshops under the COVID protocol. So those are just the upcoming things for the next 2 months or so. And then, unfortunately, Doris is not with us today. She's at home today. So you will have to trust me in doing the draw for us for our Protec hamper, which was for our lawn and lawn maintenance workshop that we had last week. And I am just going to go. Oh, I don't know why I don't have my little box here, so that you can actually see my face. And I'm just going to stop sharing the screen here. Let me just go in there again. Right, there you can see my face now. And let's just go there to our slideshow again. Okay, now we've got to go back. Let me just go back there. Right, so we are doing our draw here. As you can see, I'm mixing everything up here very nicely. I'm not partial at all. Hopefully Doris will be back next week and she can do the draw for us for next week. Okay, so our winner of our Protec hamper this week is Lorraine Roden. Lorraine, you are the winner of our Protec hamper this week. I don't know if you're online today, but you have been with us for quite a while, and I don't think you've ever won anything. So congratulations. You are our Protec winner this week. And then we've got another prize of some acid-loving stuff coming from Effecto this week. Effecto Wonder sponsoring this for us. So for today, the question is, name one plant that likes acid soil. Name one plant that likes acid soil. Send your answer to me, sueby@gardenshop.co.za, and you will be in our draw next week for our competition. Again, name one plant that likes acid soil. Send your answer to me, Subi, at gardenshop.co.za, and you will be in the draw for next week's competition. And I think it's actually quite a good time because we don't have that many participants. So if you haven't won anything yet, today would really be a good time to enter because your competition is going to be less. So let me just minimize this. Right. So just as a last little laugh, remember, acid rain doesn't make the soil acid necessarily, neither does vinegar in the soil make your soil acid. And the lady there says, I don't understand why they make such a big deal about acid rain. Can't we just counteract it with alkaline rain? So there you go. I'm going to go out of the PowerPoint here. And as I say, because we don't have that many people online today, I'm actually going to unmute everybody. And if you've got, you can unmute yourself too if you want. Where do I, if there's any questions, then just unmute. And I can then answer your questions. I see Denise has unmuted. Is there anything that you would want to ask, yes. Denise?
Yes, please, Sue. I've got two questions. The first one, I have that single white camellia, you know, not the one that's got multiple petals, but the yes. flattish one. I saw a picture of it. I have three of those. And the blooms are beautiful, but they drop off very quickly. So my question is why?
Usually that is as a result of too much watering, Denise.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
As I said to you, these plants actually are quite, they like quite dry circumstances. So people often over water them.
Okay, thank you. And my second question, for maintenance, the ongoing care, do you use the Shake and Grow hydrangea food for azaleas, etc., for all of them as well
yes,
as for
all of them, but the blue one?
Yes, yes. Okay, thanks very much. So it's for other plants, not only hydrangeas.
Yeah, no, the blue one is for everything. You'll see it actually says that on the bottle as well.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, Dinah. I see you've got your microphone on as well. Is there anything that you would like to ask?
Yeah, hi, Sue. Thanks again for another interesting talk. My daughter was in America and she saw a gardenia that was the size of a soup plate.
Yeah.
So I went out. It was a very sentimental place for her. So I went and bought her a gardenia, but we don't have any soup plate sizes. Is it possible to get one? And do you get them here?
You know what? I've never come across them at all. I would imagine that is quite a sort of a hybridized variety that hasn't gotten here. Funny enough, I don't know if it was you, somebody a while back even asked me about those very, very big gardenias. But no, I haven't seen any from the suppliers or anything like that. I actually remember I did manage to find out what variety it is, but it's definitely not available here. So you might have to smuggle it in somewhere or another. I don't know with whom, because nobody's allowed to go anywhere.
It won't be me. Yeah.
Jill, I see you've also got your microphone on. Any questions from your side?
I do, Sue. Thanks once again for a lovely morning.
They're just joking.
Sue, my camellias are not opening fully. Some of those buds are not opening fully.
Yes.
And I'm just realizing from what you're saying that maybe it's too much water.
Yeah,
at the
no,
same
usually
time, because
if the
it's
buds
a very-
fall off or they don't open properly or they become that sort of brownish kind
Correct.
of, usually as a result of too much water.
But now it's making me think more about our shade-loving plants because there are azaleas underneath them. So I'm tending to water for what the azaleas need, and it's obviously too much for the camellias.
Well, the azaleas actually don't need that much water either.
Oh, really?
They
Oh.
also prefer drier conditions.
And the fuchsias too. So are they
Well,
fine?
fuchsias
together or
are
not
going
really?
to need a bit more water because remember they're not woody perennials. They're
No.
more sort of herbaceous perennials.
Correct.
So maybe try to sort of group them together a bit more.
Yes, and leave the fuchsias out of the mix, but stick to the azaleas and camellias, etc., that need a bit less water.
Yes, yes. Because usually if you get bud drop or buds that don't open properly, it's usually because of overwatering.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for
Pleasure.
that.
Hi, Kaylee. I see you've got your microphone on.
Hi, it's actually Daphne. I'm on my daughter's granddaughter's computer.
Oh, okay. Hi, Daphne.
Sue, how often should we water?
Well,
I've got
that
very
would really
sandy
sort of
soil
depend
here,
on
so-
your soil condition.
So should it just be
And
slightly
the time of
damp?
the year it is. It could be summer, you know, and it's very hot, then you might have to water a bit more often. But I would say in winter, definitely not more than once a week. But if you've got very clay soil, you might even do it less. In summer, maybe twice a week. But always, if those plants are in containers, also make sure that they are very, very well drained.
Okay, and then just something that's other than what we are just discussing. I've got a granadella bush that I've planted in a container. Should that be, does it have a large root system that I need to take it out the container?
No, it doesn't have a large root system. Obviously, the size of the roots is also going to determine how big the plant grows. So I wouldn't use too small a container. I would use something like at least like say a 40-50 centimeter container.
Okay, so I can just leave it in the container and feed it regularly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you for the show.
Absolute pleasure. I don't know if there's anybody else that wants to ask a question. I don't see anybody else that's unmuted themselves. So I think that is it for us for today. My name is Sue. I'm your garden guru from Garden Shop. Thank you very much for joining us here again today. Monica, I see your microphone is on. Is there something you would like to ask? Hello, Monica? No. Monica doesn't want to ask anything. So yes, then that is it from me today. I will see you again next week for our Garden Guru workshop. And if you give me 2 seconds, I am going to quickly tell you what our workshop is about. Next week, our workshop will be about water-wise gardening. So you can be prepared for that. As I said, if you don't receive the login details for the Zoom workshops, they are on our website under the events tab. You will be able to get them. Thank you very much for joining us today. I will be with you next week, right here, right where I'm sitting. And hopefully Doris will be back with us as well. Take care, be safe. Thank you.